It doesn't get much worse than that, right? The Broncos suffered a historic franchise worst loss on the road to the Miami Dolphins on Sunday. What can we take away from this game, and how might it define the rest of the Broncos season here in 2023? You're going to get all that and much more with a cup of coffee on today's brand new episode, Good Morning Broncos. Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of G&B, your daily bite-sized Broncos cup of coffee and information show. You get it here on Mile High Sports every team, every day. If you're watching this, make sure you do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you get coverage, not only just the Denver Broncos, despite the tough times that are going on right now, but you get also exclusive coverage of the Denver Nuggets from Ryan Blackburn, the Pickaxe and Roll podcast. You get it from Eric Dean covering the Colorado Avalanche. Those seasons are starting up here very quickly, so you'll see more stuff here on MHS's YouTube page. Plus, you also get Drew Kreisman on the Colorado Rockies here. But Broncos country, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. And we sit here today, and I think we have to ask ourselves a lot of questions about where this Broncos team is headed. Now, look, you guys all know me. I've been very optimistic about the outlook of this team under Sean Payton. They lose 2 games by a combined score of 3 points in totality. And obviously, I think we're sitting here now saying, what is to make of the rest of this 2023 Broncos season? Denver is 0-3 on the year. But what's more disappointing, what's more embarrassing than 0-3 is the way that the Broncos lost on Sunday to Tua Tagovailoa, Mike McDaniel, and that Miami Dolphins team there. They lost 70-20 here, and I think there's so many different elements that we can dive deep into where things went wrong, but the reality of the situation is this. The Denver Broncos did not show up. The Denver Broncos failed to compete. They failed to try to get stops in this game against the Dolphins, and they allowed a historic output here by a Dolphins offense and a team that just simply had a lot more to prove than Denver did here. And right now, I mean, the narrative here is I think you can put the stamp on it, even though they're 0-3 and there's still many more games left on the season. The overall vibe in Broncos country, and I'm jumping on board with this. I agree with fans here. The season feels over at this point, as if what's left to play for here. Now, obviously, the competitor in me says there's always something to play for, right? Because you're a player, you're a coach. It's not over officially, but I think the way that things are trending, the way that the overall optics are looking here, it is feeling that way here. Now, I want to make a great point before we dive a little bit deeper into what happened, get into some of the historic numbers that Denver gave up here. Denver's offense isn't the issue this season. Look, Denver's offense is probably going to be their best part of their team here this season from now to the remainder of the year here. And it doesn't matter. Even if Denver's putting up 25, 30 points a game, it's not going to matter if Denver's defense is allowing chunk yardage, chunk plays here to go on. What we saw not only just against the Washington Commanders in week 2, but we saw it in a big, big way against the Miami Dolphins here in week 3. Denver's defense simply isn't good enough right now. They don't have the depth, I think, to be able to sustain. And certainly right now, Vance Joseph has not put them in a position as a play caller for them to go out there and to make plays, especially against Tyreek Hill and that high-octane offense here, where the idea is at least to keep everything in front of you here. We saw Tua Tagovailoa just carve up Denver's defense. I mean, his first incompletion of the entire game came in the third quarter here. He finished the game 23 of 26 passing for 309 yards and 4 touchdowns. Really a near perfect day for him on the afternoon. But the Broncos simply, it didn't matter. They couldn't stop Tyreek Hill. They couldn't stop Tua Tagovailoa from throwing the ball. Now, we knew this, though. If you watch GMB, you knew coming into this game, the Miami Dolphins offense had the best offense in the NFL in terms of yards per game, passing yards per game, and yards per play here. They lived up to the hype here in this game, and they accelerated their point total from maybe being third-ranked offense. Now, after this week, I guarantee you they're going to jump up to the number 1 scoring offense right now in the NFL here. Perspective. The Miami Dolphins offense, they ran 71 total plays. You know how many first downs they got? They got 30 first downs, and they were averaging 10.2 yards per play in this game in particular here. But what just, I think, deflates me the most when looking at this, Denver had no answer for Tua Tagovailoa in the quick passing game. They still played some off coverage here. They tried to go some man-to-man at some times and tried to press, but, you saw some double moves. But that didn't really matter here. Even if Denver tried to do that, they simply couldn't stop anybody on the ground here. The Miami Dolphins finished with 350, folks. That's not an exaggeration. They finished with 350 rushing yards on the ground. A-Chain for them. Devon A-Chain had 18 carries for 203 yards. He was averaging 11.3 yards per pop there. I mean, almost every time that the Dolphins touched had a drive there, they scored. They only had, I think, one drive there where they had a turnover on downs there. And if I'm not mistaken, they only had one punt in this game. One punt. And there's some people on social media saying that last year's loss to the Los Angeles Rams on Christmas was the most embarrassing. Broncos country, I don't know how you could even say that when you saw Sunday's game here, 70-20. Now, let's keep in mind here, let's go through some numbers. 70 points is the most that the Denver Broncos have ever allowed in franchise history. Their previous high was 59 points they surrendered to the Las Vegas previous Oakland Raiders back in 2010. Denver, they allowed 35 points at halftime. That was the second highest scoring output they've allowed at halftime since the time in that same game where they lost to the Raiders, 59, I think it was 14 in that game, or 59-10, whatever it may have been. Denver surrendered 38 points and a half in that game there specifically. This, on all fronts, was one of the most embarrassing losses in franchise history. And I feel for a lot of Broncos fans here that are simply, I've had fans tell me, I don't know if I can watch another game this season. And you know what? I simply don't blame you. In my 29 years of life, and I'm a young pup. In my 29 years of life, this is one of the worst losses in NFL in modern era history. The Broncos defense, they allowed over 726 yards of offense. That's the highest since 1951 allowed by any team in the NFL defensively. As we talked about as well, 350 yards on the ground here. Denver once again struggled with penalties on the defensive side of the ball here. But just the overall efficiency in the way that Tua and Mike McDaniel's offense carved up Denver. It wasn't necessarily anything like the Broncos' offense was bad. No, Denver's offense early on in this game was very solid. They had 2 touchdowns that got called back due to a penalty, which is unfortunate because maybe it could have changed a little bit of the vibe here, maybe the momentum there. But unfortunately, it wouldn't have mattered here because Denver was not going to put up 71 points in this game. And it's unfortunate. You know, Russell Wilson, I thought, did a really good job on the day. He stood in the pocket. He delivered some throws while still getting hit there. He had one interception. I know a lot of people say, well, he had a pick. The pick really wasn't his fault there. He goes to throw the ball. It's deflected by a defensive lineman. It lands right into the guy's hands. I mean, this season and how things are going here for this Broncos team, folks, it's not on Russell Wilson. It's not on the Broncos offense. Denver's defense turned in one of the worst performances in NFL history, which is so weird to me because we look at this unit, we look at the personnel that they have, a good majority of it is returning from last year. New play caller in Vance Joseph. That's the big difference, right? Obviously, Draymond Jones not being on the team. That's a big difference here. Not having K'Wan Williams in the nickel. That obviously hurts. He's obviously one of their top players in the secondary. No Justin Simmons in this game. They missed his presence here early on, especially in that early 54-yard touchdown there by Tyreek Hill. I don't know if Denver's got an answer for the rest of the season. And look, while I think, a lot of Broncos fans are justified in saying, you know what, the season is over. At 0-3, like realistically standing, like talking about logic and numbers here, like I think, 0-3, the season feels very much over here for Denver, even though that there's still a statistical reality. They could somehow go on a run here, win some games here, but they haven't put anything on tape here to show us that they can do that. It doesn't matter if Russ puts up 30 points on the offensive side of the ball. If Denver's offense has got things going downfield, none of that stuff matters here when the defense is surrendering more than Denver can generate on the offensive side of the ball here. And what have we been talking about here for the last few years? Man, if Denver's offense can just get on par, Denver's going to be a pretty good team. Well, Denver's offense takes the next step forward here. Russell Wilson's done really well in Sean Payton's scheme. They've got some really talented players like Marvin Mims. You're seeing contributions from Cortland Sutton. Look, Cortland Sutton had a big day for Denver, but unfortunately had 2 negative plays that are going to really highlight maybe the perspective that fans have on him. Obviously, 2 lost fumbles. It's tough there. He's trying to make a play to try to will his team there. Got to hold on to the football, got to protect it, unfortunately here. But, you have those types of performances from these guys, and unfortunately the defense is just on the field, and they're just getting boat raced here by the Miami Dolphins. I mean, I want to go through here, and I want to tell you here, these are chunk yardage plays surrendered in this game here. Okay, we're going to go down the list here. Rushing, passing, receiving. Okay, from the rushing department, A-Chain for the Dolphins. His longest run of the day was 67 yards. Raheem Mostert's longest run of the day was 20 yards. Brooks, a backup running back here. His longest run of the day was 52 yards. There's 3 explosive plays right there for you. Now let's go to the receiving department. Tyreek Hill's longest catch was a 54-yard touchdown. There's 5. Robbie Chosen, 68-yard touchdown. There's 6 explosive plays. Raheem Mostert out of the backfield as a pass catcher, a 19-yard reception, explosive play. Braxton Berrios, 22-yard catch, explosive. A-Chain, a 17-yard catch out of the backfield. Another explosive play. Durham Smythe, a 15-yard catch in this game, his only catch of the day. And then River Craycraft, 13 yards. Denver surrendered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 explosive plays of, I mean, I don't even know what the word is, like a different type of magnitude here that contributed to a 726-yard offensive output for Miami. This was one of the most embarrassing performances I've seen from Denver. Not only did Denver surrender that much yards on the ground, through the air, they failed to create a single turnover for the second consecutive week in a row here. They couldn't get off the field. They couldn't tackle. They couldn't stop anybody. And it was probably one of the worst performances we've seen in modern NFL history here. So where do the Broncos go from here? Well, we're going to dive deeper into that conversation on today's episode of G&B. Real quick, Broncos country, this episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there, Superbook Sports. Why bet with the big boys this football season? Instead, try your hand with the local book. That's Superbook Sports. This fall, Superbook Sports is the book next door, just a dedicated team of the best odds makers in Las Vegas, making sure you get the best prices and parlays anywhere. And now, Superbook will give you a bonus up to $250 when you sign up and wager on the same day and use the promo code MILEHIGH. So bet with the best. Use promo code MILEHIGh this football season with Superbook Sports. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Where do the Denver Broncos go from here after an 0-3 start, but more importantly, the most embarrassing loss in franchise history, the most embarrassing loss in modern NFL history here for this team? Where do they go here with so many question marks? Sitting at 0-3, statistically, they still have a chance if they can go on and get a string of wins. But as we've talked about here, they haven't shown much on the defensive side of the ball that gives anybody optimism or belief that they're going to get better here. So what does that mean? Will we see Sean Payton make a change here at defensive coordinator? There is a distinct possibility. As the time that we're sitting down recording this, nothing has happened here so far for Denver. But to allow a 726 performance, look, I want to be very clear here. Vance Joseph is not on the field making the plays, but he holds shared responsibility because he is the play caller. He puts these guys in positions. Obviously, the players have to go out there and make plays. Don't get me wrong. But Denver didn't have a very good game plan defensively. They couldn't counteract the quick passing game of Tua Tagovailoa, as we had talked about in this game. You can't just sit back in off coverage because they will dice you apart. They did that. They couldn't get enough pressure on Tua because he would get the ball out of his hands so quickly. Mike McDaniel in that offense is one of the most prolific things we've seen. Like him and Kyle Shanahan, they obviously run the same offense here. It all stems from Mike Shanahan's offensive system, the Bill Walsh tree and things like that. There is no answer for that, and Denver simply doesn't have it, right? Some other team might be able to find it, but Denver simply has not found the answer to stop an offense like this, and it is taking over the NFL, and a lot of teams, I think, are going to try to emulate this at some point. But Denver has consistently failed to adjust, right? And look, we talked about it earlier. There's times when you go and you play press coverage, but when you're giving up 10.2 yards per play, whether that's through the air or on the ground in the rushing department, it doesn't matter if you go to play press coverage here. It doesn't matter if you put Patrick Surtain on Tyreek Hill one-on-one on every single play. None of that stuff is going to matter here. What we saw from Denver is that their interior defensive line, they got their butts kicked in this game here. I mean, Miami was able to do whatever they wanted. They imposed their will from the very first series of that game here. And I think right now we can just be very honest here. Denver's depth on offense and on defense right now, it's not in a great spot. I mean, they're already banged up. No Justin Simmons. You lose Caden Stearns for the year. That's a massive blow for them. But you don't have other depth guys to step up and to fulfill the roles and obviously the obligations that you need here. So does Sean Payton make a change here with Vance Joseph? I think it's a very realistic thing here. I mean, I can't imagine Vance Joseph coming out of a game like this and all of a sudden Sean Payton being okay with that. Sean Payton being happy with that being the reality here for this team. So we could see a change, and hopefully as we're talking about this and recording this, no change has already happened. But I just go back to the point where Broncos country deserves better than the product that they're getting here on the field here. And if the Broncos do make a change and move on from Sean Payton, I think you have to acknowledge here, okay, what is that going to look like? Maybe you promote Christian Parker, who I think if they do make a change, I think Christian Parker's the perfect guy to call the defense. He spent time with Vic Fangio. He spent time with Ejiro Evero. He knows those defenses, and Denver might be able to revert to some of those old calls and some of the ways that they're calling it or coaching it up here. The Broncos defense right now is the same schematically as it was last year, but it's being called entirely different here by Vance Joseph. It's rough. I don't know where Denver goes from here. I sit here, and usually you guys have listened to me. I usually have some optimism or a sense of direction as to, okay, here's what the team can do to get out of this rut here. But I also think we're approaching a very pivotal time here where we may have to ask the question here. We've seen the Broncos try this approach of trying to rebuild their roster year in and year out through the draft, through free agency. And obviously the last few years, there haven't been a lot of draft picks where Denver's been able to do that because they traded away picks in order to get Russell Wilson. I understand that. And Russell Wilson is not the problem with this team here in 2023. But you have a limited window here with Sean Payton as he is the head coach. He signed a 5-year contract with the team. Do you, at one point, is this the time where you come in because of this type of performance and say, you know what? We cannot win with this team the way that it is. Do you embrace a full-on rebuild here? And then do you spend the next 2 to 3 years trying to maximize this window, building, maybe getting a young quarterback on the roster? Denver may finish with the first overall pick this year in the NFL draft if they continue to play defensively the way that they are now, because the schedule, it doesn't get any easier for them. It gets tougher. I mean, you can make an argument Denver may not see their first win. I mean, I don't want to say that. Denver can win games. They're very capable, but if they can't stop anybody, it's not going to matter. But the stretch that's coming up ahead doesn't give, I think, any Broncos fans any realistic realm for hope here as we talk about it here on this show. Denver may have to look at a full-on rebuild, which means that, hey, if Denver doesn't have a single win by the time the NFL trade deadline comes around, maybe Denver is offsetting a bunch of players here. Now, I think you have to ask the question, who are players that, in your opinion, are untouchable? For me, if I'm going to embrace a full-on rebuild and I want to have the best players possible to build around, okay, obviously I think the notion would be with Sean Payton, you're going to try to go get a quarterback in this year's NFL draft, right, and build around him. Caleb Williams is a name that's been talked about here. Can Denver be in a position where they can find that here? You may have to trade some of your best players in order to get into a position, even if you don't finish with the first overall pick, but you want to be able to have a chance to jump up there. You may have to include players like that, some top players. And I think you got to do right. Like if you are going to embrace a full-on rebuild, I think George Paton, Sean Payton, they need to do right by players like Justin Simmons. If you're going to trade away your best players here, you need to send them to a contender where they deserve to go on and win. Justin Simmons deserves to be a winner in the NFL. He deserves a chance to compete for a championship. It would hurt me a lot if Denver traded away Justin Simmons because he's so good for the team. Like you talk about face of the franchise on the field, off the field. Simmons is the best there is, I think, in terms of representing what it means to be a Denver Bronco. But if you're going to rebuild and you're going to tear it all down, like, hey, we're going to lose for a while here until we can try to build to win again, do right by your players, the way that George Paton did for Von Miller at that one standpoint that we saw a couple of years ago. And obviously, Von went on to win a Super Bowl ring there, and obviously you're very happy for him. But Denver's in a rough state right now. So if you strip it all down, you have to have the understanding. And look, Broncos country, Denver's bad right now. But you have to embrace the understanding here. Okay, hey, if Denver's going to accept a full-on rebuild and strip everything down to its bare bones, they're going to be bad for a while. But the hope is, as you continue to build with some young building blocks on offense and defense and maybe a young quarterback, can Denver get back to a point where they can compete to win? That, I think, is the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves here. But this isn't a 1 to 2 year thing, folks. This could be a 3 to 5 year rebuild here for this Broncos team. And as we know, Sean Payton's contract, 5 years with the team in totality. Does it mean is Denver going to get to that point? I don't know. It's hard to project, but I think if you're going to rebuild, the question is does Sean Payton want to rebuild? He may not have a choice here, but I think me personally, I'm comfortable and I'm confident in a coach like Sean Payton to lead a rebuild to get Denver where they need to be. He did a tremendous job in New Orleans. It took some time, but he did it the right way. And I think Denver could have an opportunity to do that here once again. So who are some players you build your franchise around? I'm going to go with Marvin Mims. I think he's the type of player you need for any type of young quarterback you may try to build around. If that's the case, that's the path you want to go. Patrick Surtain, in my opinion, is another guy you build around a defensive building block, an elite corner. But Denver also needs an elite edge rusher, an elite defensive player outside of a secondary guy to go out there and make an impact. Denver doesn't have that right now. And I think that's definitely showing here so far through 3 weeks of the NFL season. This could all be hyperbole, but I think right now the overall optics and like a long-term team building perspective says that Denver is not in that place right now where they have guys that they can build around. I think Jonathan Cooper can emerge into that guy. I think Nick Bonito has tools to emerge. You obviously keep these guys on your roster here, but Denver's got to find a way to get that, get some of these guys there fast. I just don't know if they have that right now on the roster. Their depth is obviously tested due to injuries, but they may have to scrap things. And look, I think not having draft picks the last couple of years has definitely impacted them, but Denver's in a position now where, hey, you're going to have draft picks going forward. You have a chance to get even more. How you do this is going to be very defining if you do strip it down and rebuild. But Aside from that, Broncos country, I mean, not much more we can talk about in terms of Sunday's game. It was just an embarrassing effort, an embarrassing performance altogether. And unfortunately, it's left a very, very bad taste in the mouth of Broncos country here. I've had fans tell me they're not going to watch. They're not even going to go to games. And I'll be very curious. Look, Denver's on the road next week against Chicago. I would not be shocked if we see in excess 10, 15,000 no-shows for the Week 5 game against the New York Jets. This was a gut punch to the fan base in Broncos country, and I'm very, very curious to see how the Broncos ownership group, how they respond to it, how Sean Payton responds to it. Do we see any changes here this week for the Broncos? It's an interesting question to throw out here on today's episode of G&B. But Broncos country, that'll wrap up everything I got for you here today. Thank you so much for tuning in, for watching us, for listening to us here on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Hang in there, Broncos country. Times are tough right now, but you know what the saying is? When you pray for rain, you got to deal with the mud too. And the Broncos are hoping that the damn mud dries up at some point here. We'll have you covered every step of the way here on GMB. We'll see you tomorrow morning for a brand new episode of the show.